The Death Mage Who Doesn't Want a Fourth Time. Chapter 66. The bell signaling the end sounds clear, but it sounds unpleasant to a god. About 4 months had passed since the pillaging of the farming villages, and it was now well into summer. It was a season where the air conditioning of demon lights that absorbed heat from their surroundings was absolutely essential. Vandaloo, now having turned 6 years old, was spending his time busily in Talosheim. Establishing systems for agriculture and textile production was a great deal of work. First, the crops that he had stolen along with their entire fields were growing well. Too well. Since the climate would change greatly from crossing the mountain range, he had first planned to use death attribute magic to prevent the crops from dying while performing selective breeding. However, the crops quickly adapted to Talosheim's soil. It was likely that because they had been growing in the soil of a former Devil's Nest, they were compatible with the soil of Talosheim, which was a semi-Devil's Nest. Wheat could be harvested 3 months after being planted, immediately eliminating the impending shortage of grain in Talosheim. The other vegetables were able to be harvested earlier than normal as well, though for some reason they kept producing more flowers without wilting and using their roots as legs to move around. It seemed that the cause of this was the use of fertilization on unused monster parts to produce fertilizer and the addition of Vandaloo's mana. Well, I suppose it's fine. Vandaloo had no complaints, as the crops they produced were good quality and they didn't have to be constantly tended to like normal crops. But I do wish that they would stop attacking me as if to say, have a good taste of me whenever I go to look at them. No matter how good quality they are, onions are harsh to eat raw, and please stop throwing tomatoes at me. There isn't a festival for that in our nation. Stopping them all is quite difficult, Vandaloo complained as he used his arms that had been branched and extended with spirit form transformation to catch and collect the produce that the monster plants were picking off themselves and throwing at him. This repeated itself numerous times before they finally stopped. It seemed that plants that threw their own fruits were dangerous. The wheat, root crops, and potatoes had not turned into monsters yet. On the other hand, the production of textiles had gone well, up to a certain point. Get up. With the same principle that he applied in creating wood golems, Vandaloo was able to manipulate the raw materials with golem transmutation. Of course, he had not been able to simply produce textiles straight from the plant, but he had successfully extracted fibers and created threads after boiling and softening them. He had been able to create linen with plants from Borkus's sub-dragon dungeon. He had also produced fluffy, warm wool, similar to sheep's wool from the belly fur of needle wolves, and something similar to silk from cemetery bees. Cemetery bees did not make cocoons that completely surrounded their pupae, as the bees and hornets of earth did. However, when the larvae turned into pupae, they placed lids over the chambers containing the pupae. The cemetery bees created those lids with threads. They were lids large enough to cover chambers containing pupae that would become 30-centimeter-long adults. He was able to harvest slightly more silk than silkworm cocoons would yield. Of course, the lids would be broken once the cemetery bees emerged from the chambers, but for Vandaloo, who could even create boards using sawdust, turning the broken lids into golems, restoring them to their original shape, and creating threads from them was not a difficult task. Vandaloo named this slightly honey-colored silk as honey silk. Well, it's only making threads and cloth that's going well, though. The spinning wheel golems could create threads. With the looms, which were also golems, cloth was not a problem either. As dyes, by boiling down fallen leaves and branches from immortal tree ents, he had access to numerous colors. The resulting cloth was of excellent quality even in Eleonora's eyes. If it were to be taken to the Commerce Guild, the merchants would be flooding in to buy it. But in the end, it was just cloth, nothing more. They were not clothes.
"Making clothes and accessories is difficult, isn't it?" Vandaloo remarked. "Well, I suppose so,"
Zadyrus agreed.
"If it's loincloths, even I can make them,"
said Vigaro.
"No, those don't need to be sewed, do they?"
Saria pointed out. If my wife was here, she would be able to tailor simple clothes, said Sam.
"Your daughters might somehow manage,"
said Borkus. Everyone lacked the experience and knowledge to tailor clothes from cloth. Cloth was a valuable item they almost never got their hands on, so most of their clothes were made from leather and fur. The undead titans of Talosheim had not had contact with the outside world for a long time. They had not had the time to be concerned about their attire. Though there were some who could do basic sewing, like Rita and Saria, there were no needles or craftsmen capable of making clothes from scratch. Vandaloo was not much better. The only knowledge he had was what he had learned in home economics class at school. If he remembered those times, he might be able to make something like an apron. Even the researchers who researched the textiles of origin were not experts in creating clothes from textiles.
"Well, I suppose if I acquire skills, I'll be able to make all kinds of things," said Vandaloo.
With skills, he might be able to somehow figure out how to make the clothes he had seen on Earth. In the end, it was decided that he would go through trial and error with everyone for other things, such as kantoi, which is simple clothing consisting of a large piece of cloth with a hole for the head.
"You have acquired the farming and clothing skills."
There were many spirits lined up in front of Vandaloo, who was sitting on the throne in the audience room. They were the spirits that had been inside the undead expedition army that attacked Balcheburg. They had taken over 4 months to return. However, those present here were those whose personalities had not completely collapsed due to the long time since their second deaths and journey back, only around 100 of them. It seemed that since they didn't count as Vandaloo's followers, 4 months passing without death attribute magic protecting their spirit forms had caused most of them to be reduced to letting out wordless groans.
"Well done, everyone. With this, I will forgive you the sin of attacking Talosheim,"
Vandaloo declared. The spirits cheered. They felt happy from the bottom of their hearts at the fact that they would formally be accepted as part of those under Vandaloo's command.
"Now then, General Cesare, please show them the way,"
Vandaloo ordered.
"Yes, Your Majesty."
As Cesare appeared wearing a military uniform with decorations placed proudly on his chest, the spirits reacted in 2 different ways. The great majority of them cheered at being reunited with their former boss, while a small number of them had their already collapsed faces collapsing further with an expression of surprise.
Cesare,
you're the general, said Langel Mavid, the head of the smaller group. Cesare had been the second in command due to having been born in one of the Empire's vassal nations, so his unexpected promotion caused Mavid's eyes to open so wide that his eyeballs looked as if they would fall from his sockets. Cesare chuckled in response to Mavid's words. Well, if it isn't the former Supreme Commander, Mavid Dono. It has been a while. What is the meaning of this, Cesare? You were an enemy of Vandaloo-sama just like me, so why do you become the general? Mavid demanded. The Eclipse King is a forgiving person, said Cesare. He has acknowledged my work and bestowed me with decorations as well as the position of general. How could this be? Though Mavid seemed unable to believe it, Cesare had in fact been very useful. Cesare had not been a super-capable commander, nor had he possessed unrivaled fighting strength. However, his impressive ability when it came to office work had been preserved even after becoming an undead. He knew how to organize an army and its supplies, and was knowledgeable about the structure of each fort in the Merg Shield Nation, as well as the tactics that each nation employed. He was also quite well informed in things outside of military business, such as law and commerce. He would be an important, capable person, dead person for Vandaloo from now on. Borkus was strong, reliable, and trustworthy, but fundamentally unable to do desk work. Now then, proud soldiers of His Majesty shall grant you new bodies. You will fight alongside the Black Bull Knights Order and myself, for the sake of the Eclipse King, Cesare declared. Vandaloo had not included the Black Bull Knights Order in the disposable army. He was having them act as instructors to teach the Titans and Ghouls how to conduct large-scale battles effectively. And since they were knights, they were able to do desk work even if not at the same level as Cesare, so they would be handy to have around from now on. Incidentally, Vandaloo had kept Flark, Jeannie, and Masara, the three who had been Riley's slaves, because each of them had their uses. Their personal histories were what they were, so he had to be careful with them, but they were obedient for now. The spirits of the former expedition army grew even more excited, having heard that Cesare was the general and that the Black Bull Knights Order remained. It seemed that they had gained hope for their future lives.
"I will not accept this! I will not allow you to be the general!"
Mavid shouted, but in the next moment his voice wavered.
"So, you are saying that you are dissatisfied with my choice?"
asked Vandaloo. The air in the audience chamber changed as all of the spirits directed angry glares at Mavid, as if they were looking at their sworn enemy. No, I was simply...
I appointed Cesare as my general and bestowed him decorations. Everything was done through my authority and will. If you are dissatisfied with that, that means that you are dissatisfied with me, doesn't it?
That is... I apologize. Please forgive me for my inappropriate words.
Mavid lowered his head, but Vandaloo remained indifferent, not speaking any words of forgiveness. Cesare extended Mavid a helping hand. "My apologies, Your Majesty. Please forgive my subordinate his insolence." Mavid's spirit trembled in response to Cesare's sneering voice, but he was ignored.
"Are you sure you want to take him as your subordinate?" Vandaloo asked. "It sounds like it would be troublesome."
"Of course," Cesare replied. "Making use of the useless is one of the duties of those who stand at the top."
"I understand. I'll leave the personnel affairs to you, Cesare."
"Ha ha! I am grateful and happy. Now then, stand. You will start again as a private." The former General Mavid's spirit was taken away by Cesare and his subordinates. As a spirit, he could not hide his true emotions, so he was wearing an incredibly furious expression, but it was simply humorous. The large number of spirits of those born in the Merg Shield Nation went with them, followed by the spirits of those from the Umid Empire, who were wearing pitiful expressions. Many of them were to become living armors and cursed carriages. Incidentally, the rest of the spirits whose personalities had collapsed were turned into golems and cursed weapons. Either way, Vandaloo could not avoid preparing bodies for them. He was unable to turn them into astral-type undead like ghosts and wraiths that consisted entirely of spirit form. Before, the reason for this was Vandaloo's death attribute magic skill was simply too low of a level, but the problem with his ability had now been solved. The problem now was the spirits that he was using as materials. To turn spirits into astral-type undead, the spirit must possess extraordinary emotions of defeat. Without anger, hatred, regret, and grief, they cannot become undead. Due to the effects of death attribute charm, those killed by Vandaloo felt happiness at having been killed. Rather than speak words of hatred, they would bow their heads and say, "Please allow us to repay you for the favor you have done in killing us." They were impossible to turn into undead consisting of only spirit form. Leaving that aside,
"Keeping up with this farce is tiring," said Vandaloo.
It was necessary, but not very interesting. The earlier conversation was necessary to have all of the spirits gather under Cesare. If the hierarchy was not clearly established in front of everyone, things might be fine when Vandaloo was around, but there would be no telling what would happen if he went to the Orbaum Kingdom. Though the spirits of those born in the Empire were few in number, Vandaloo needed to make them understand the chain of command. Factional disputes and having members of the group drag each other down like in the Demon King's army would simply be troublesome. Perhaps it would have been for the best if Vandaloo had broken Mavid's soul, but if he used his last resort right from the beginning and something were to happen after that, he would have been in trouble. The final resort would be used if Mavid did something completely unforgivable. Vandaloo could only pray that he was smart enough to express his dissatisfaction through no more than complaining to his superiors during his spare time.
"Now then, Riley and Gordon, step forward,"
said Vandaloo, calling out to the two remaining spirits.
"You called me God?" Gordon's expression was that of a lunatic.
"Ha ha 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 ha!" Riley approached with twisted laughter. Certain feelings welled up within Vandaloo as he looked at them. Vandaloo gave a small cough and forced himself to ignore the taste of blood mixing with his saliva as he continued speaking.
"I have a favor to ask the two of you."
Gordon and Riley gave a respectful bow.
"Please instruct me as you wish," said Gordon. "I offer you all that I have."
"Tell me to do whatever you want. My spear, as long as I have my spear, I can kill anyone," said Riley. It was really impossible.
"Be destroyed."
Vandaloo used spirit form transformation on both of his arms and plunged one into each of Riley and Gordon's spirits. The two of them screamed and froze in astonishment.
"Why are you... Why?"
God, why? You said that you would forgive my sins.
"Yes, I did forgive you for your sins this time, but I haven't forgiven you for what you did to my mother."
As their faces twisted in despair and agony, Vandaloo swallowed the mixture of saliva and blood in his mouth as he continued speaking.
"I did consider it. I thought about enduring it. I did my best, but in the end it's impossible."
It wasn't my fault!" Riley screamed.
I simply obeyed my teachings," Gordon gasped.
"I understand that," said Vandaloo. "I've known for a long time that you aren't to blame."
Riley wasn't at fault. He was simply an adventurer, joining the extermination force to wipe out the ghouls in the Devil's Nest's forest, joining this expedition army, using his criminal slaves as shields, capturing and handing over a woman who had given birth to a Dhampir to religious fanatics. None of it was his fault. None of them were crimes in the society that he lived in. They were deeds that were not punishable by law. The fact that he made deals with the vampires was the one serious crime that would be worthy of capital punishment, but it wasn't as if Vandaloo was obliged to execute him in place of the Empire and Merg's Shield Nation. Gordon wasn't at fault either. He had simply followed Alda's doctrine and exterminated vampires and those obeying them. Trying to kill a Dhampir, using whips and brands to inflict gruesome torture on a woman who had given birth to a Dhampir, and making a show of burning her alive in public. He couldn't be blamed for any of these. In fact, these were good acts that deserved praise from the people of the Empire and its vassal nations. Indeed, the society that he had belonged in and his position had simply been different from Vandaloo's. An undead Gordon and Riley would be useful. They didn't have bodies, but if Vandaloo provided them with new ones, they would become capable fighters. That was why he had thought about various things and tried to endure his emotions for 4 months, but it was impossible.
It's so impossible that my status effect resistance skill level has increased because of the stress it's caused me, said Vandaloo. Just by thinking about forgiving you, a hole opened up in my stomach and I even threw up a little blood earlier.
It cannot be!
When Vandaloo stopped to think about it, it was only natural that the perception of good and evil would differ in different societies and positions. He remembered that even on Earth and in Origin, those in different societies and positions killing each other was something that happened every day. So then, was there a need for Vandaloo to try to endure? Perhaps if he was planning to enlighten the people of Lambda with some kind of knowledge, then enduring it might be best. He should forgive these two, but what Vandaloo wanted to do was pursue his own happiness. He had no intention of going through the trouble of enlightening the world in a self-sacrificing way. If forgiving them and accepting them was impossible, then there were other options, such as using them as golems, burying them somewhere, or releasing them. But the more Vandaloo thought about these options, the more they became out of the question. Riley and Gordon were far more dangerous than Orby, the hunter who had ratted out Darcia, whose spirit Vandaloo had abandoned underground in the forest near Evbegia. If he abandoned their souls in random places and they were recovered by Rodkart, Alda, Yupion, or Hihiryushu Kaka, it was possible that Vandaloo would have to face them again. That would still be fine, but it was also possible that they could cause harm to everyone from some faraway place where Vandaloo could not even see them. Vandaloo did not know what gods were capable of. However, he believed that gods were malicious. He knew how cruel and vicious they were. As Gordon had used the skill called Familiar Spirit Descent, a skill that allowed what would be called an angel on Earth to possess his body, there was no doubt that Alda had taken notice of him. That was why Vandaloo could not take that risk.
And, most importantly, I hate you, he said.
Gordon and Riley's unpleasant screams that sounded like shards of glass grinding against each other stopped with a clear, cracking sound. Their spirits collapsed, and the fragments of their souls that resembled particles of light began to fade away. The moment he saw this, Vandaloo felt joy from the bottom of his heart. The exhilarating, cool, refreshing feeling of having made the world a little cleaner that he had felt when he had broken Serkrant's soul.
Now then, 5 enemies left to take revenge on.
Heinz and his companions, Earl Thomas Palpapek, and the pure-breed vampire Gubamon. Even though he had omitted Alda and Yupion, as he wasn't sure whether gods existed in a place he could kill them, this was quite a prominent list of enemies. Vandaloo had a long road ahead of him.
Well then, a toast to celebrate our victory in this war, said Vandaloo.
To our victory!
There had already been a celebration after they had returned from destroying the cultivated land, but now that everything is over, a new victory party was being held. 4 months ago, the main feature had been hamburgers consisting of giga eggs, mince made of a combination of dinosaur and orc meat, and the mountains of hard bread that the expedition army had been using as food. It was before onions had been harvested, so Vandaloo felt like there was something missing, but everyone had enjoyed them. It seemed that cooking with minced meat had not been invented yet. The main feature today was the contents of the bowls of everyone present. Ramen.
This resembles udon and pasta, but it is completely different, isn't it?
Zadiris remarked.
Delicious! It's so delicious!
said Borkus. Vandaloo had finally succeeded in creating the lye water that was crucial for producing the distinct texture of the noodles in ramen. With this, he just needed to make noodle-making machines and come up with something for the tare sauce and dashi to make ramen. It probably could not compare to the taste of ramen made by famous shops that had long lines of customers on Earth, but Vandaloo did think that it was better than the instant noodles he had eaten before. The noodles are good, but the soup is really delicious. Van, how did you make this? Asked Bastia. I took the time to slowly produce dashi from dinosaur bones, said Vandaloo. The kyokotsu ramen, typically made from pig bones, had dashi resembling dashi made from chicken bones, but with richer flavor. Incidentally, carnivorous dinosaur bones produced a peculiar flavor, while herbivorous dinosaur bones produced a light aftertaste. Plesiosaur bones produced a strangely fish-like flavor.
Bochan, you've been rewarded for the hard effort and years of research, said Saria. I suppose it's been around 3 years, said Rita. Lye water is harder to make than a disease, isn't it? Rita, I don't know about putting it that way, said Vandaloo. Bochan, I think this ramen lacks ketchup, said Saria. You make good use of it, don't you, Saria?
King, what about the tofu? Braga, putting tofu in ramen would be quite daring.
Gorba, I have no idea what you're saying.
There was plenty for additional helpings, but everyone was eating so much that Vandaloo was starting to feel uneasy.
Ah, Van-sama, said Taria. Even if you do not do that, we can... Well, this is training as well, said Vandaloo.
In the kitchen there were several Vandaloos floating in the air, busily making ramen. Vandaloo's spirit, which had left his body with out-of-body experience, had split into multiple. With materialization used on both arms, as well as the use of parallel thought processing and the long-distance control skills, he was doing multiple people's worth of cooking.
The preparations have all been done, so all that's really left to do is cooking the noodles, isn't there? And then they just need to be served in bowls. The sherbet for dessert is ready to be served as well. It would be helpful if you could only use one person to talk, said Eleonora. Eleonora, I'm just one person, you know, said all 3 Vandaloos at once. Vandaloo then realized that when he was working like this, to others it appeared that there were many of him. For him, it didn't feel much different from increasing his number of heads, however. Each Vandaloo was Vandaloo, and their memories and consciousness was unified. They did not possess independent wills and egos, nor did they have conversations among themselves. There are so many Van-samas. Since there are so many, it should be all right for me to take one away, isn't it? No, there are limits on the distance they can be separated from me, so please don't do that, Taria.
Currently, a few dozen meters was the limit at which Vandaloo's clones could be maintained away from the main body containing his soul. This distance would probably increase if his long-distance control skill leveled up. It would be perfect for creating alibis in murder cases, though Vandaloo could only imagine a future where a fierce-looking detective would say, "Since you can do this, it would have been possible for you to commit the crime." Perhaps he was just too pessimistic.
I suppose it's time to hand out the sherbet, said Vandaloo.
Yay, sherbet! Yay!
The youngsters, Pavina, Bilde's daughter Varbi, and Bastia's daughter Jadal, showed excitement as the dessert arrived. Rahapisage showed her excitement as well, though it was a little questionable as to whether she could be put in the same group as the others. In any case, time passed by peacefully in Talosheim during Vandaloo's 6th summer.
The levels of the status effect resistance, strength and followers, soul break, god slayer, cooking, long distance control, spirit form, parallel thought processing and materialization skills have increased.
In Rodkart's personal divine realm, Rodkart had just finished maintenance on the Circle of Transmigration system. Though he called it maintenance, he was actually just having a look to see whether any problems had occurred. His system was so perfect that even if there were some small problems, the system would solve them on its own. Suddenly it happened, just as he was wondering whether one of the people reincarnated on Origin had died yet, and whether he should check if someone had made contact with Vandaloo and Lambda, just in case. An alarm started ringing in the Circle of Transmigration system.
What? Impossible. It was working without any problems until a moment ago. A soul has been extinguished.
Astonished at this major incident that had not occurred in over 100,000 years, Rodkart quickly adjusted the system. The extinguishing of even a single soul would have large effects on the system. If nothing was done, the extinguishing of a soul that is supposed to be reincarnated would cause a baby to be born without a soul. It would be different from a mere stillbirth. Without a soul, the baby's brain would still function as normal and its heart would still beat. It would develop, but in the process, a soul not passing through the Circle of Transmigration would enter it and fuse with the body, being reincarnated on its own and causing unexpected problems. The system would place another soul to replace the extinguished soul in the now empty space where it was supposed to be reincarnated. However, doing that would produce another soulless baby. This would occur repeatedly, causing a serious system error. If left alone, there would be frequent cases of babies with memories of their previous lives or people born with special abilities.
There are 2 extinguished souls.
Rodkart investigated the souls while taking emergency measures. The soul of the human called Bormac Gordon was not a problem. Alda had sent a request to him to turn it into a heroic spirit after his death, so his soul had already been removed from the system. Alda would grieve over it, but the extinguishing of this soul would have no direct effect on the system. However, the extinguishing of the human called Riley had already caused damage to the system.
Just what has happened? Has the Demon King been resurrected?
Because their souls had been extinguished, Rodkart could not look at the records of Riley and Gordon. With no other options, he looked at the records from those close to him. Though records from the soldiers and the priest warriors led by Gordon before they became undead, as well as from the soldiers and adventurers in Balchisburg. Then Rodkart arrived at an astonishing truth.
That is, they became undead, and that Amamiya Hiroto, Vandaloo, was the cause of it.
Rodkart had been aware that undead could be made with the death attribute magic, but what he saw was on a scale larger than he had hypothesized would be possible. That alone was not surprising, but...
What is the meaning of this? How does he possess such powers while under the effects of my curses? He is not as powerful as when he turned into an undead in Origin, but... at this rate, he might come close to it, and this amount of mana exceeds the limit that mortals are allowed to possess.
Leaving his experience points aside, Rodkart had expected that Vandaloo would not be able to gain any jobs, but now he realized that there were large loopholes in the curses that he made. They were holes caused by Rodkart's lack of interest in Lambda's system of jobs and skills. On top of this, the curses were large negatives that produced even more blank space in Vandaloo's soul, an even greater empty frame. Vandaloo possessed even more mana than he had held in Origin. But what was an even greater problem than his jobs and mana was the fact that he had broken souls.
To think that Vandaloo would possess powers with the same properties as the Demon Kings. This is not good.
If Vandaloo kept breaking dozens, hundreds of souls, this alone could inflict massive damage upon the system. It would not collapse, but it would likely produce too many defects to count. If Vandaloo fell into a state of despair and broke tens of thousands of souls within a short period of time, reincarnation would no longer happen in Lambda. New infants would not be born, and it would become a world of the dead.
This requires swift action, but...
The actions Rodkart could take were limited. He couldn't do something as dangerous as descending onto the world himself. Even if he asked Alda to descend himself, considering the current state of the world, he was very unsure as to whether Alda could be relied on. And letting him know about his current endeavor of reincarnating more people in Lambda from Origin would be unwise. Even if he wanted to interfere with the system directly and create familiar spirits directly under his control from exceptional souls, such exceptional souls were not readily available. Was there no choice but to wait for one of those reincarnated in Origin to die?
There is no other choice. Fortunately, either there is a limit to how many souls he can break, or he has imposed some rules upon himself. If that were not the case, he would have broken more souls than 2 by now. I shall wait until someone comes from Origin.
Mom, Miss Sarah told me that I can do a lot of things if I make contracts with the evil god of bone fangs, the evil god of obscene skin, the evil god of degenerate flesh, and the evil god of entrails, said Vandaloo. Vandaloo, I think it might be dangerous to make contracts with gods like that. You're right. I don't have any leads on gods that are in charge of blood either. Well then, shall we go with a forbidden spell to create a homunculus? I'll need to research the forbidden archives of a mage's guild, so it's still out of my reach, though. But it is said that those who do receive Alda's divine punishment. So it comes down to the resurrection device after all. But I can't fix it yet.
Around the same time, Vandaloo was making an attempt to make straw paper while discussing Darcia's resurrection with her.
You have acquired the taboo name title. What's this?
Vandaloo got something new, but he didn't know what it meant, so he left it alone. Title explanation. Taboo name. When beings who possess a certain amount of influence acknowledge someone while taking care not to give that person a title, that person gains this title. In Vandaloo's case, he gained this title because Alda and his subordinates, Marshuzarl, the Emperor of the Amid Empire, and the 3 purebreed vampires were careful not to give Vandaloo a title. It doesn't have any concrete effects, but it shows that one is feared at least on a national level, and possibly even feared by the gods. Because of this, someone possessing this title is often interpreted as that person being an extremely dangerous individual. When those who were being careful not to allow the bearer of this title to gain a title stop doing so, and a suitable title is given, this title disappears.